Our correspondent Andrew Harding has been visiting frontline farms near the heavily bombarded city of Slovyansk.
It's harvest time in Ukraine's war-torn Donbass. From his perch, Volodya Bukantsev can see the front lines, just one hillside away to the north. Traces of smoke on the horizon. And then this. Two Ukrainian fighter jets roar overhead to attack Russian positions. You can see a Russian rocket blazing upwards, narrowly missing one jet. The planes both launch decoy flares and turn sharply, heading home. We see this almost every day, says Volodya. The pilots do their job, we do ours. My son is fighting on the front line near here too. Farmers and fighters. Almost everyone else has left or is leaving this region. Hurried farewells at a bus stop, to the sound of Russian rockets landing nearby. And plenty of those rockets and cluster bombs are hitting Ukraine's wheat fields, setting fire to thousands of acres. It's another challenge for the farmers and for a world that is increasingly desperate for Ukraine's crops. Farm owner Sergei Kurinny takes me on a tour of his bomb craters. He used to sell almost all his wheat and sunflower seeds for export, but the war has put a stop to that. He shows me more footage of the damage to his farm. This is where the cows were killed by another bomb, and in fact we can just hear a few more in the distance. It's quite a noisy morning here. But the biggest problem, Sergei tells me, is the Russian blockade. The ports are closed, he says. We can't export anything, and so the price we get for our wheat has dropped by 2/3. A deal to end Russia's blockade could make a huge difference, but it won't end the war. And so here in the Donbass, Ukrainian farmers are racing to harvest and to store what they can, whatever the risks. Andrew Harding, BBC News in eastern Ukraine.
Well, let's get more on this. We can cross over live to Kyiv to speak to Matthew Hollingworth, who is the World Food Programme's Emergency Coordinator for Ukraine. Matthew, when we talk about 20 million tonnes of grain stuck in silos around the Odessa area, what are we talking about in terms of people being fed? How many people does that feed?
This country used to feed 400 million people a year. That's how much food they exported last year. You talk about the 20 million tons of food that's been blocked because of the fighting and the closure of the ports. There's 60 million tons of harvest expected this year, of which 40 million should be normally exported. So the amount is enormous, as I say. You're talking about 2 or 3 or 400 million people around the world that would normally rely on food coming from Ukraine.
Can you help us to understand the difficulties, even though this deal has been signed? It's not a permanent deal, it's for a period of time, but it has been signed. It's not going to automatically mean that this grain will be accessible, though.
There's still a war going on. There's fighting every day. You just heard from the Donbass, and those are everyday events on the frontline areas. There are strikes on railways. There's a massive shortage of fuel in this country, which stops the trucks from moving around the country. And we still have a blockage right now, which is yet to open. This agreement, once it's operationalized, is going to be absolutely key for this country. It means that those blockages will start to unblock, food will start to be exported, and that may, over time, have a significant impact on the global world markets, on the food inflation that many countries are facing. But it's going to take time, it's not easy, and there is a war still happening in areas where people should be harvesting right now.
And we've seen the dangers that those farmers have to go through just to collect their harvest as and when they can. When we hear about the second initiative that especially the World Food Programme is working on, the fertilizer that's coming out of Russia, can you just help us to understand why that is important?
Right now, all over the world, you're seeing huge fuel and food inflation issues. And we've got double-digit inflation in many countries where food insecurity is a major risk. We've got triple levels of food inflation in places like Lebanon and Venezuela. These countries are desperate for this support, and yet what we also know is, while the world faces a food access problem, the ability to afford the food that is available right now, we know in a year's time, towards the next harvest, without fertilizer, there will be a food availability crisis as well. You put those together, the figures that we're facing right now, 345 million people living in acute food insecurity, those numbers can only continue to go up. So it's absolutely critical that these two initiatives have been signed at the same time and are moving forward. One, to get the food out of this country, to start trying to balance food inflation and provide confidence to food markets around the world. But two, to ensure that next year's harvest, does not suffer because there's not enough fertilizer for farmers around the world.
It's all interlinked. Matthew, you paint a really stark picture. Thank you very much for just helping us to talk us through that. Matthew Hollingworth, World Food Programme's Emergency Coordinator for Ukraine. Thank you.